Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're enjoying your lunch, but we're gonna get started our lunch keynote. We wanted to start a different topic. We don't want to make it just technology centric, right? That's the mistake that a lot of us do and a lot of organizations are doing. We're not implementing technology for the sake of implementing technology. We're not putting in an endpoint protection tool or a perimeter protection device or a behavior analytics system or a discovery system just for the sake of technology. We're trying to solve a problem, empower the business, and more importantly, reduce risk. But is technology alone reducing risk? I would disagree with that. I would say that technology gives you visibility and gives you a tool to use, but ultimately changing behavior is what we're going after, and that's what this session is all about. It's about raising awareness and reducing risk. So increasing visibility, knowing your assets, knowing your identity, knowing the various things that we talked about earlier are critical, but more importantly, they have to resonate with the business and they have to resonate with our users. Because if your users are not on board with your information security program, they're going to be fighting you all along. They're either not going to have enough knowledge to be able to perform their work, or they will be trying to circumvent all the nice fancy tools that you just put in, which is counterproductive. So raising awareness and engaging employees and engaging your business is as important as the technology that we're using. So to start with that, I'll introduce our panel. We have a great panel lined up today, and we'll start with from this side here. We have Joe Oregon. He's from the San Diego Fusion Center. He's a CISO for the San Diego Fusion Center. Joseph Oregon is a veteran of the U.S. Army Intelligence, and has spent 21 years in the DoD and intelligence community. Currently, he enjoys dual roles as a Chief Information Security Officer, CISO, and Cyber Intelligence Unit Manager for the San Diego Law Enforcement Coordination Center. Mr. Oregon is also a lecturer for San Diego State University, Department of Management Information Systems, where he develops and teaches current relevant curriculum to guide future IT leaders on the management needs of today's information system professionals. Mr. Oregon is credited with the creation of the Department of Homeland Security's recognized and national award-winning Cyber Intelligence Unit at the San Diego Law Enforcement Center. Mr. Oregon also assisted with the development of the San Diego County Office of Emergency Services Cyber Disruption Response Planning Annex and various cyber disruption response teams for the San Diego region. Mr. Oregon also recognized for assisting in the development of the California Cybersecurity Integration Center, which is responsible for the strengthening of the state cybersecurity strategy and improving interagency cross-sector coordination, and I can vouch for that. He's an advocate of trying to get us all tied in together. In recognition for his efforts, Mr. Oregon was recently awarded the National Fusion Center Association Award for Excellence in the field of cyber protection, presented by the Undersecretary for Intelligence and Analysis at the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. Mr. Oregon holds a master's degree of information technology with emphasis on security, bachelor's degree in software engineering, and various cyber certifications. Mr. Oregon is currently enrolled in Colorado Technical University for a doctorate program. I didn't know that. Congrats. And with emphasis on cybersecurity and information assurance. Our next panelist, we have Tony Gillespie from ForeScout. He's the U.S. Public Sector Strategist. Tony Gillespie recently retired as a GS-15 Assistant Chief of Staff, G6 for Marine Corps Installations East. He nearly has 35 years of Marine Corps active duty and civil service. Mr. Gillespie was responsible for the voice, video, data, and security for the U.S. Marine Corps bases on the East Coast, south of Quantico, Virginia, and is the primary architect on the pilot for the Comply to Connect for the DoD is what the program that he enforced in there. Next we have Renault from Symantec. He holds multiple certifications. He's the Chief Cybersecurity Business Strategist. He's a distinguished engineer and serves as a Chief Cybersecurity Business Strategist for North America. In his role, Ross leads information security and privacy through leadership discussions and strategy, increasing Symantec's presence in public and private sector. Mr. Ross represents Symantec as a conference keynote speaker, state senate expert witness, providing testimonial along with the with a chief level position presentations around the country on security best practice. His expertise lies in enterprise security management, virtualization, and clouds. Prior to Symantec, Mr. Ross worked as a global security and privacy architect at a private company located in Atlanta, Georgia. His duties included establishing the organization's first global security program with compliance. A lot of us here are building new programs, so those are good to compare notes with them. Mr. Ross also holds certifications, including Certified Information System Security Professional, CISSP, HIPAA certification, Microsoft certification, Symantec, Cloud Security, VMware. And last but not least is Noel Kyle. She's from the Department of Homeland Security. She's the program manager for Cybersecurity Education and Awareness Branch. And we all talk about not enough cybersecurity talents. We talked about that earlier, and education is a key piece on filling that gap. Ms. Noel Kyle is a program manager within the Department of Homeland Security, Cybersecurity Education and Awareness. She has 14 years of experience, about half of which has been spent immersed in cybersecurity training and workforce initiatives at the DHS. She's a subject matter expert in cybersecurity workforce development and has been closely involved with efforts to define and categorize cybersecurity work, as well as to build strategies for recruitment, retention, and manages the nationally focused cybersecurity program called FedVTE. If you have not used it, I highly recommend it. It's a free training available for all government agencies, and we use it at Riverside. Previously, she worked at Fortune 100 companies, small businesses. She managed business improvement programs, financial analysis, reporting, marketing. She also holds a Master's of Business Administration from the University of Miami and a bachelor's degree from Old Dominion University in Virginia, as well as project management certification and information security manager certification. So please welcome the panel to the discussion, and we'll get that started. So we talk about security awareness training, and everybody that I know of within our field has been training their employees and raising awareness, as far as taking classes, doing tests, and things of that nature. So the question I posed to the panel is, nearly all regulatory frameworks, they mandate security awareness training. Nearly everybody in the field is doing it, yet we're still seeing employees being the source of 91% of breaches. If you want to recommend to the audience, how do you improve the success rate and penetration of your security awareness program, and how do you help drive down that number from the employees being that 91% cause of breaches within an organization? We can do a round robin. Do you want to go first, Joe?
Yeah, so I'm just taking a look at my employees. I kind of treat it like I do it at school, right, with students. So I teach the managing information systems at San Diego State, and it's a business. It's a business degree, or it's a business department. So trying to teach folks in marketing, finance, etc., IT, and it was specific interest in IT security is very difficult. So I found it beneficial to kind of drive home that message, to kind of make it personalized security. What does it mean to the student? And I kind of shift and pivot like any good hacker would, and I just use the same information and say, what does it mean to employees? So utilizing things like open source software to help them secure their networks at home, because good chances are, if they're not practice good security or cybersecurity hygiene at their place of employment, they're probably not practicing in the house as well. So what does it mean to run a security onion or a distro Linux, right? Or Kali, or what does it mean to secure your router or your Wi-Fi access? The small things kind of add up, and they kind of drive the message home with regards to doing more than just filling in a box. Because regulatory stuff is just going to basically, you're putting a check in the box, and people leave the security training right there at that doorstep. And it's very difficult to find folks that want to take it that next level and then personalize it so they understand exactly what does it mean to someone that's working in finance. You know, what does it mean to that person who might open up the attachment that says invoice and then all of a sudden they have a malicious attachment? Well, they're probably doing the same thing, looking at coupons at their house on their Hotmail account. And so I can draw a correlation between those type of hygiene practices. So in me trying to kind of drive that home, I definitely make it personal.
Thank you, Joe. Tony, do you have any comment on how do you improve your employees' engagement where it resonates and the training and the material sticks with the employees?
Some of the things that we did was the progressive punishment. So if you're really trying to tighten up, loosen up between the keyboard and the seat back, who's convinced that workstation is their personal property. And I have always seen that typically the employee thinks that this is my workstation. I can do what I want to do on this workstation. So the first thing you have to do is we would explain to the individual through a pop-up, this is a government piece of equipment. It doesn't belong to you, and it's designed to do the work that you're being paid or that you've obligated yourself to do if you were a volunteer. And if that didn't work, the next time it would actually, that they did something that we considered not the best practices, then it would actually take them off the network for a period of time. The third time, it would take them off the network and their supervisor had to come see my CISO. That was usually the end of any issues that we had. So the progressive, making it personal to them and getting them to understand that this is not their property. It belongs to the United States, or it belongs to the state or the local. That is a work piece of gear. That was probably one of the biggest changes that we made over a period of about 18 months.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I'll speak just from an industry perspective, and I can also speak from some things that we're doing in Symantec. First of all, let me just say, you can patch a system, but you can't patch a person, right? I think you've heard that before, because if so, I'm patching my son because he's probably raiding my refrigerator right now as I'm speaking. So establishing a baseline somewhere, right, and making it fun and making it simple, right? It was interesting. I was speaking at the Boys and Girls Club not too long ago, and I asked him, I said, well, what is cybersecurity? And someone thought cybersecurity was a security guard that checks the internet at the door, right? So you gotta make it simple, you have to make it fun, and you have to start to establish a baseline. Start somewhere, because now you have something that you can measure from. So if you're looking at engaging the employees, I would start with those three things.
Okay, thank you. The training is not just on following best practice. There's also, you have your own staff, your own IT staff that's managing and administering systems. So there is best practice, how do they properly manage the infrastructure, as well as how do they not fall victims. And on that note, when I took that position, my daughter asked me if I get to carry a gun around, so I can see that whole discussion. Kyle, Noel, do you have any comments as far as beefing up your employees' training?
Absolutely. So at the DHS Cybersecurity Education and Awareness Branch, we manage national cybersecurity workforce development, training, and education programs, all with the goal of building up the national pipeline of the cybersecurity workforce. And we know that as part of doing that, it's really important not only to make sure we have the right technology in place, but also that we have the people who have the right knowledge, the skills, and abilities who are able to run that equipment and protect us all against threats and attacks. So as part of the conversation, and one of the things that we offer is something called the National Stop, Think, Connect campaign. This is a national year-round program that promotes general cybersecurity awareness tips, best practices, and techniques. And we have a wealth of free resources that you can download and that you can promote these practices within your organization. So we have tip sheets and videos and newsletters and things that you can use to make this a really personal conversation, like so many of the panelists spoke about, and to tie in how cybersecurity awareness best practices affect everybody and how we all can there's risks to all of us if we don't maintain those best practices. So you can download those on dhs.gov/StopThinkConnect. And another thing we do as part of this awareness conversation is run the National Cybersecurity Awareness Month. So I'm just curious, with a show of hands, how many of you are aware of National Cybersecurity Awareness Month every October? That is great to see. So many of you know about it. So every year we run this every month, October. And even last year we had more than 100 events across the country. So I think with having these tools and resources available, sharing them with people, showing them that personal side is one of the best things we can do to increase everyone's awareness of how we can stay safe online.
Thank you. Some of the examples that we've done that I've personally found the most effective is to try and drive the point home that it's your problem, not just the city's problem, or the county for that matter. We've had phishing simulations where if someone falls as a victim, they still viewed it as an IT problem. You need to go clean up the mess. You need to change the password. Yes, it's my password that you need to change, but it's still not my issue. It's still a city or a government or a company problem. So we try to adjust our training, and we've done simulations related to their paychecks. And the minute their banking account information or social security number was in question, it's no longer a technology problem, and it became their problem. And the engagement level was astronomical. Rather than people saying, yeah, I clicked on it, I'll change my password, and I'll take a couple of training modules, and I'll do it again, most likely. But when we made it relevant to them with their finances on the line, with their family and their benefits on the line, employees were not following up once, reporting something went wrong. They were saying, do I need to call and put a credit freeze? Do I need to call my bank? Do I need to cancel my credit cards? Now it resonated that much more with them that it's impacting them directly. It's not just our problem. You're an equal partner in this issue. There's also the positive reinforcements, right? There's definitely a discipline factor that can come at play. But positive reinforcements is another option. Naming who's the, I think one of my peers, I met with them and they started a game for whoever reports the most valid fish, and whoever has the highest number in the month, they were giving him awards. And I think they mentioned they gave him that fish that sings that you put on the wall. That was the fishing thing that they had. I don't know if that motivates or that would drive all the coworkers insane every time somebody makes that thing sing. But there's definitely more than one strategy, and you know your environment, you know your users, and you can see what resonates the most and what gets the most impact, because the goal is drive change, because we will not continue doing the same thing and expect the result to be any different. The next question I have for the group is, how effective would you consider phishing or social engineering simulations, and how do you approach them within your own organizations?
So effective, yeah, they're pretty effective, at least from my shop. So I believe it's important in a tier level for all of our employees to understand, how they could be affected by a phish or being social or social engineered. With just practices, there are applications out there that allow you to implement a phish and just generate information to kind of give management the heads up of, hey, that we might need to invest a little bit more into training. We had X many of employees that fell victim to this internal phish, and it provides that that ROI at the end of the day, or at least justification for you to kind of venture down into conducting your own internal phish or your own internal software or social engineering attempts, just to see where you're at as an organization. But definitely it's been beneficial for myself at my center.
We did a phishing simulation on one of them bases, and then took those results and actually worked with each one of the individuals that fell victim, and then 30 days later did another phishing attack, and over 50% of them did it again. So I was sitting down with the chief of staff and the general, and I'm like, sir, there is no patch for stupid. And the training and speaking to the individuals doesn't seem to help. We've got to come up with a better way of getting them to understand that they need to look at their emails, they need to look at taglines, look at URLs. And I'll be honest with you, we never did break the code on it. And so I'm happy to hear what everybody else has to say about it.
Pretty interesting, yeah. And I like that patch for stupid. I want to talk through a scenario just within Symantec. And that scenario, and first of all, Symantec, we are the most targeted company in the world, as you can imagine. There's a lot of intellectual property that we maintain and customer data. But essentially, the goal was to provide a phishing scenario for the sales team. So think about this. A sales guy is in the field, he receives an email, and that email basically says your American Express has been denied. Let me tell you, that lit up like a Christmas tree, right? And it was some very high-ranking folks that actually double-clicked on a link. And when you double-click the link, it says maliciousdomain.com, right? So it's scary. So just, hovering over the link will tell you where it's coming from. So what I'm getting to is the goal is not to trick, it is to train, right? Because what that does, if you remember earlier, I talked about creating a baseline. It gives me a baseline of who are those folks, and now what I can do is I can target those individuals with training material to ensure that they're aware of what has occurred. So that's one scenario. The second is we're talking about employees, but let's talk about the IT folks, particularly, let's say cybersecurity. So you get a CISSP or a certified ethical hacker certification. Certifications are a point in time. If you think about it, they're static. I have a lot of them. I took a lot of exams. Believe me, I drank a lot of wine too because it took me a long time to get them. But the net of it is, do you take your cybersecurity team through simulation, right? Do you have them walking in the footsteps of the adversary, right? So that's what we're seeing. We're seeing organizations use these cyber simulated platforms to take their cyber teams through the experience. So for example, I give you a scenario. I'm state of California, I lose this information. I have to adhere to GLBA, HIPAA, and so forth, so on. And now I want you to break into the system so I can see what it is from the other side, right? That's an example. Or you're looking at hiring maybe someone with a CISSP or one of these certs. Prove it to me, right? I give you a scenario within the interview, right? So that's just another example as well in terms of how you can take simulation to reboot and empower your team, but more importantly, leveraging that baseline to start somewhere, but not to trick, but to train.
Good comments.
Sure, and just to add on, definitely as part of this, the training strategies that we develop, that phishing piece and the phishing emails is definitely a large component because they're so important to learn through doing and through actually performing the activity and reporting that phishing email. Even internally in our organization, we have a phishing campaign going on right now. If you see a suspicious looking email, you can select a phishing button right within the email browser, and a pop-up comes up to give you that positive reinforcement that we were just talking about, that, hey, you got it right. I know even within the area that I work, when we see those come through, we all see who can be the first one to get it right. And that's just one part of the training. There are a lot of other training components we've put together in our strategy, several of which just speaking about too. So love to talk more about some of those in the future questions.
Go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, I just wanted to add a little bit to that. With regards to providing a small phishing campaign within your organization, I think it's important to make sure that you tier level it. Make sure that you have something for your regular users, you have something for IT. Make sure you have something for your directors, your managers, your C-level personnel as well. They need to be phished. Because I work law enforcement, so we see a lot of business email compromises come through, and that's all C-level folks. People that actually respond to the spear phish, if you will, the direct phish to that C-level personnel. That happens to unfortunately click or sends money to $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, a couple million to somebody in the Bahamas because he thought his COO needed this money transferred or wired from one location to the other. That needs to be established as well. Where are we at as an organization? Not just the employees, but everyone is susceptible to a mistake. everyone needs training, and it needs to start from your management, because we have to show leadership. We have to show that we're not above the law, and we're able to go ahead and provide that way forward to our employees, to IT, et cetera. So definitely tier line that, or tier level.
Yeah, and one thing I wanted to add is taking advantage of your in-house learning management systems for the content repository, right? You're already using these systems, right? And just leveraging that content. And she's a very important person. There are a lot of resources available for you all at DHS.
Thank you. There's one comment that you made that resonated with me, and that's think that, train your own information security team. That exercise is not just meant to exercise your employee and train your employees. And to take a step back, the training aspect is not just that you're launching the campaign. If you're starting a new phishing simulation or training, you want to begin at baby steps, right? You don't want to make employees feel like they're being trapped. You want to start with something very, very obvious, right? And then you gradually start building up and increasing the difficulty to kind of build the immune system, their digital immune system, to be able to stop these things from coming through. I wouldn't recommend trying to come up with the most difficult thing, because that's just going to demotivate everybody up front. But on the other comment, switching hats, right? You got to have your own team being tested. How fast will they respond to an actual attack? Evaluate your tools. How effective are your tools at stopping that phishing simulation that you just did to yourself? Because you're not just the end users, you're also the responders, and you need to test your own capabilities. One fascinating thing I ran into, so switching the blue hat to the red hat, when we did our own phishing simulation, I used an open source platform. And I was not just collecting data. I was fascinated by the amount of data that was getting captured beyond, we weren't capturing credentials, first of all, we'll get that out of the way. But we were getting insane metadata that I didn't even think it's something that someone can collect or use during a phishing campaign. And some of the examples was, if they did it from a mobile device, I was getting operating system fingerprint. I can tell what Android device, what patch level they're running, and what carrier they're using. That's enough information to send them much more targeted. Now I have their email. I know it's a live one, right? If I'm an external attacker that knows absolutely nothing, I know that I have an active user that's gullible that clicked on my email. I know what operating system they're using, what phone company they're using, what patch level they're using, and if I can identify through the various exploit databases and exploit to the platform they're using on their phone, the next email is not going to be a phishing email. It's going to have a weaponized payload that will compromise that phone, that device, or if I'm not the techie type, I can just social engineer them into saying, hey, I'm now your carrier, and your phone is up for replacement because you have an older phone, and click here to get your upgrade. How creative do you want to be? And put that, switch hats. What would you do if you were the bad guy or gal? And what would you, what information would you get? And this was metadata that I got out of a phishing campaign that was not an intended goal. But when you start thinking outside the box, you can really leverage your training and your various experiments to the max extent. Great conversation. So my other question now is, we're trying to change our organization, and that's changing the way people work, changing how they protect themselves in the city, and human nature is to resist change. But effective security is always evolving because the threat actors are always evolving. How would you enforce a current, up-to-date security program and still win the battle for hearts and minds?
That's not an easy one. If I figure that one out, I'll write a book and give it to everyone.
A co-author.
Well, I believe in incentivizing. Making it, making those that are actually susceptible or are having issues with cyber hygiene, not ostracizing them. I think one of my colleagues up here said just a second ago, provide them the extra training. Don't make them feel stupid, right? Excuse the quote, but don't make them feel ostracized. Kind of enfold them, teach them. Make them part of the environment, or make them a part of the security posturing for your organization. Let them know how they can continue to assist, and then utilize that information to kind of build on your security practices as a team. sew in cyber hygiene into their evaluations, or their quarterly or yearly evaluations. Make sure it's a checkbox. If they've succumbed to some type of phishing, make it a percentage of their overall evaluation. As you start to kind of give them something to shoot for, you start finding that people are that they'll warm up to, if you will, some of your suggestions. They'll warm up to the idea that security is here to stay, and then we're looking to mature this program. And as they become more comfortable with that idea, you're going to see less and less mistakes, in my opinion. And at least in my experience, we're starting to see that at my shop, where folks are being a little bit more. They're aligning themselves a little more closely to what we're wanting to do from the security posturing at my center.
This kind of ties back to the briefing I gave this morning on, what's our biggest threat now. It's not as much the users anymore as it is the IoT, and that's where Comply to Connect, CDM under Homeland Security, same program, comes into automating some of your security baseline functions, getting away from doing the human patch, scan, validate, report. You'll never get caught up. There's a way to automate it, get that done, and use those resources that were doing that to provide the additional on-site training, the positive reinforcement, the ability to go out and be proactive instead of reactive to so many cyber events. We spend so much of our time playing whack-a-mole that we haven't been able to go out and do those long-term proactive, 5-year strategic plans. And while that was happening, IoT came in, OT came in, and there's a tsunami of devices out there right now that are a risk. And so very rapidly, the issues we're having with the users and managed devices is going to get overwhelmed by the unmanaged IoT devices, and we still got to fight the fight with the managed devices. So we've got to come up with a way to automate some of the processes for baseline security functions. If we can eliminate the phishing attacks, eliminate some of those cyber threats in an automated fashion, then we can focus on those more proactive issues that we're running into these days.
How much time do we have on this subject? I feel like a Baptist preacher here. So I think we touched on all the data points. The thing I want to say, and I'll give you some examples, is one is security has to be a win-win. And understanding that if we can build security in on the front end, it's going to save us a lot of costs on the back end, right? I don't know if anyone is driving a self-driving vehicle, but think about the security related to those vehicles if we don't embed security in. There was just a proof of concept where someone demonstrating compromising a Jeep, they actually disabled the braking system, right? That's scary, right? And so by sharing those examples, I think that's one way to ensure that consumers and employees are engaged. The other thing is, I would hate to be a CISO. They have a tough job. I was talking to a CISO not too long ago, and he said, Renault, Monday through Friday, I work on my operational plans. And Saturdays and Sundays, I work on my strategic plans, right? That's a big job, right? So it really starts up at the top. Do I have sponsorship? What am I protecting? I'm from a little small place called Texas, and there's a saying that you don't protect a $5 horse with a $10 fence, right? And understanding and tying that back to the regulatory compliance. But ultimately, security should be built in and not a bolt on, and you have to sell it in the beginning, right? Because if not, they'll find a way to get around it, right? We just went out, we were speaking to a customer not too long ago, and we asked him one question. We said, sir, how many cloud applications do you have in your environment? And so looks at us and he says, we have 40 cloud applications. And so after we did an assessment, we found out there were 928 cloud applications, right? Because folks were finding a way to share information, if it's Dropbox or MyBox, you name it, right? So again, it has to be built in, it has to start at the top, and I'm gonna say my favorite word, the P word, right? Policy, process, program, because you cannot fix strategy with a technology problem, so.
And what I want to add to the conversation about how to enforce the security policy is how important it is to have the right people in place with the right skills and the things that you can do to build up that workforce. So what we're using within the federal government and also within many state, local, tribal, territorial governments and industry is something called the NICE Cybersecurity Workforce Framework. So NICE stands for the National Initiative for Cybersecurity Education. And the framework is something that's been developed with 20+ federal governments and agencies and so many other partners to define and categorize cybersecurity work. So the framework has 7 overall categories and 30+ specialty areas and 52 work roles. So these work roles define cybersecurity jobs, and at the most granular level, they list the tasks, so the individual unit of work that somebody would need to do in their jobs to protect their organization and to enforce security, as well as 1,000 KSAs, so the knowledge, skills, and abilities, the things that they would need to know or the knowledge they would need to have to do that work. So the framework has been published by NIST Special Publication 800-181. The 3rd version is out there. Within the federal government, the Office of Personnel Management has mandated that we all use it. So all of our jobs, my job, is aligned to the framework, and so many states are implementing it now too. California is so far ahead of the curve. There are groups here across the state that are already incorporating it. They're starting to use the language in the framework to build up their workforces. And all of the other programs that my section runs within DHS, we align all of them to the framework. So our training programs, and even as the next tiers beyond the awareness training, so the intermediate and advanced training, that aligns back to roles within the workforce framework. So as you organize your work in this way and you write your job descriptions and your career development plans using this language, we're creating this consistent language across the country that we can all use to build up the workforce. And I just encourage everybody to look at it. You can see it on our website, the NICS website, which is the National Initiative for Careers and Studies. And that's NICCS. If you look for that in the search engine, you'll find it. And we have lots of other tools of not only using the framework to define the work, but also what do you need to look for when you're hiring or developing people in these roles. Most recently, we've drafted and are about to publish something that we're calling capability indicators. So the capability indicators are those factors that you look for when you're hiring somebody or that you want to train and develop once they're on staff. So these are also great tools that are available to help you build up that workforce and train.
And I just want to endorse what you just said. Take a look at that framework. It's awesome because, again, just consistency with job and duties. You can tie that back to training. You can tie it back to resources. So a very powerful piece of material there.
I think you nailed a couple of really good points. If you're looking at changing culture and changing how our current workplace operates, you're going to have to either train your existing employees or you're going to have to look for specific traits on your new hires. So you covered both topics there. And people resist change because they fear the unknown. The more they know about it, the more they can grasp, the less resistance you're going to have. So bring them into the conversation, bring them on the table, and have them become a contributing partner into making the organization more secure rather than them being a casualty of trying to make things more secure. Because you know, that I love the topic that was mentioned earlier. You know, you instead of having a technology sensor, when your people are more security conscious, then every person becomes a sensor out there. If you're looking at making change, if you empower the users, educate them, raise their awareness, then each one of them becomes a change agent within your own organization. So thank you. Training and onboarding is definitely great points. So what about the executive team? How do you sell changes to the executive team, budget, funding, building program, or even changing the way the business operates?
Chomping at the big there.
All right.
I told you. Sorry.
By all means.
Yeah, first of all, if you're not using this little small framework called the Cybersecurity Framework, you probably want to start there. The framework is awesome because what it does is it gives you structure to any of the regulatory mandates or frameworks that you're using today. And I would say I would start with the cybersecurity framework to understand what are my gaps. And so when I say gaps, the policy gaps, the process gaps, the people gaps, and then technology. As you notice, I said technology last because it starts there. What's my gaps? But more importantly, what are my business imperatives? And then how do I tie those to my security objectives? That's important, right? Because ultimately, the goal of IT is to enable the business, and the goal of security is to go horizontally across the business itself. So now if I can say, well, here are our gaps, right? So by making this widget faster, better, and cheaper, we're able to embed security on the front end. Guess what? Now you're getting executive management attention. And not only that, when you present that, in Symantec, we have something we call a risk scorecard. Essentially, what's the business goal, right? What's the security project or initiative, right? And then show me the money, right? So that's how we paint that picture. So tie back to the business goals. And again, leveraging the cybersecurity framework is a great framework because I'm not going to get into any detail, but it talks about these 5 functional areas from am I protecting my assets? Have I identified all of my critical systems, right? Am I detecting when bad things happen? Most importantly, can I respond and can I recover? So think about those as programs, and then those cascade into 22 functional areas underneath NIST 1.0. And then from there, those cascade into 98 categories. You can look at the categories as technologies. So that's going to be more so the guidance. But as far as the detailed information, that crosswalks over to if you want to leverage the SANS Top 20 or if you want to leverage COVID. So again, didn't mean to be too long-winded on this, but this is just an area of passion because I'm speaking to a lot of entities, both public sector, private sector, and 99.9% of them are looking at and leveraging the cybersecurity framework to have that big conversation, to understand, to her point, do I have the right people in place? More importantly, do I have process? And then obviously, do I have technology? And then what you can do is you can start to cobble together the technology to address the business problem, but you have to have policy and process. Yeah.
And I'll just add on. So it's so great to hear about the framework that Renault was describing. And it's, and that is also mappable back to the workforce framework too. So for each one of those categories, for the protect, defend, you can map that back to the work roles in the workforce framework that you would need to have on your staff. And also, as we're talking about executive management training, I think I'll use this opportunity to talk about FedVTE, or the Federal Virtual Training Environment. And I'm just curious, how many of you have used FedVTE or know about it already? So great, a handful of you. DHS manages a learning platform called FedVTE. This is a free online training platform. It's available 24/7 for all U.S. government employees and veterans. So that's federal, state, local, tribal, territorial. We have more than 60 courses, and at least a dozen of them are aligned to some of the really popular certification courses, things like Security Plus, CISSP, CISM, so you can take the boot camps there. And it's a lot like being in a boot camp. You'll see the professor on one side of the screen and the slides on another, and you'll see questions from the audience. There are so many different proficiency levels. There's introductory courses, so we've got 101 courses in coding and critical infrastructure, and we also have very advanced courses too. So there are so many great things on the platform, and we have courses specifically intended for that executive level audience. One of our most popular courses is a 6-hour course called the Cybersecurity Overview for Managers course, and this is a wonderful introductory level course for somebody who's taking on cybersecurity responsibilities within their organization, but they don't necessarily have that technical background. We also have a cyber risk overview for managers. So these are the types of things that a senior level could take to build up their understanding and their knowledge about cybersecurity so that they're able to lead and manage others on their staff. Another thing that's really great about FedVT, about those courses and others, is that it helps if everybody within the organization, or as many as possible, can take some of the same courses, they can all start speaking the same language. We hear often that within an organization, not everybody has the same definition of threat, attack. They don't understand what those words mean in the same way. So by taking courses like this, it can baseline everybody to have that same conversation.
Awesome. I wish I could take notes.
Joe?
I think they nailed it pretty good.
I can speak to it from the executive level, C-level. I had 8 bases in 6 states, so I had basically had, 8 different S6s who are CIO levels and 8 different CISOs who had to come in and talk to me. And I can ask y'all the same questions I'd ask them. Do you have enough people? Do you have enough money? And do you know everything touching your network? None of them could say yes to those 3 questions. So when it comes down to the budget battle, the manpower battle, they nailed it. You've got to tell me, what is your business case? What does this mean to me? How much is it going to cost? And what's my return on the investment? The biggest thing that you're looking for is the so what. So when a vendor came into me, and we called it the once a month Thursday vendor. I won't
be nice.
They'd come in once a month on Thursdays. They come in, and my secretary would set up for them to come in and show me their S&S, shiny new stuff. And so if a vendor walked in and they came in, and the first thing they were talking about was, hey, I want to replace this product that you've already got in your network because my product's better, and this is why that product is so bad. That was a 15-minute conversation. And then I thanked them, and off they went. But if they came in 15 minutes, they said, here's how I'm going to fill this gap that I perceive in your network. And if it was an actual gap, they had my attention. The same thing with talking to the executive level management. I could go to the general and go, here's your risk, here's your benefit, here's your cost, here's what you get in the long term. And the general always asks me, he goes, Tony, I only want 3 slides. What's it going to get me? What happens if I don't do it? And so what? If you can't define, if you can't articulate, so what? You're never going to win that battle.
If I can add to that, one CISO said breach number 1 got him a security team and breach number 2 got him a budget. He's no longer with the organization, unfortunately.
So I'll use an example about engaged executives, and actually it's slightly funny, slightly sad. So I worked for a previous non-government organization, and we had the executive team well engaged, well trained, and one of the C-level executives received a phishing email. Actually, I don't believe it was phishing. It actually contained a weaponized payload. And the C-level executive was sharp enough, remember their training, and they did not open the email. But what did they do? They forwarded to a random person within IT, the first name that came to mind, and did not include context about what that message was. And they said, can you please take a look at this? And the person in IT said, the C-level executive must be sending me something really important. Let me open it and see what it was. And a wildfire broke out. So as a part of training your users, don't just train them on what they shouldn't do. It's what they shouldn't how they should communicate when they're reaching out asking for assistance, because the role can actually skew against you and actually turn into an incident. So just wanted to share that out with the group. So if anybody's seen, there's a Dilbert cartoon that's slightly funny, and it's the technologist talking to the leadership. And I think the first cartoon started, in the mid-2000s, and there's the Dilbert tech guy sitting in front of the CEO, and he's talking about virtualization, and blah, 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 and all the executive hears is virtualization, regardless of what they're talking about. Fast forward 10 years, and now Dilbert is sitting in front of the CEO, and all they're saying, cloud, 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 cloud. In our field, we say security, liability, compliance, and diligence, and they may all sound the same to whoever is listening. The leadership and the executive team. How do you explain the difference, and how would you leverage, having that discussion with the business to engage them on security, liability, compliance, and even the due diligence of board members when you want to embed security within your business operations?
I think it's important to first understand what your business goals are and what are crown jewels for that organization. Once you understand that, you kind of understand what departments have input or touch those crown jewels, and as you're building out your security posture, you're building your security posture around that, around those crown jewels, and it slowly embed the different organizations or the different departments within your organization, and you solidify your security. It makes it a lot easier to translate what liability and compliance means to the actual departments and why it's important. So that's how I kind of just involve the entire unit in that manner.
Good answer.
I'm really fortunate, Army, Marine, Navy,
And civilian.
I'm a civilian, civilian DOD, and federal.
Needed a cab.
I certainly feel secure up here. One of the things that I always tried to articulate and get the point across, not only was, the so what factor, was the easiest thing that I ever spoke to one of the senior level generals or chiefs of staff that I had to, or particularly the budget people, was to talk to them about what's going to happen when something breaks. I'm the one that's going to end up taking responsibility. Here's our risk. We are not, and this is the best statement you can ever tell your boss, we are not in the risk avoidance business. We are in the business of risk assessment, risk mitigation to an acceptable level of risk. Once you got that point across, usually everything else is understandable. That we don't avoid risk. That's not what we do. We try to find it, mitigate it, and make it acceptable. And once you get it to an acceptable level of risk, you've got to make sure that it stays that way. It's like when you give your kids the keys to the car for the first time, and you're panicked until they get home, or you follow them around until you're sure that they're not doing anything stupid. And then as soon as you're not watching, what do?
Well, he started it. I didn't say anything about the Marines, but we will be the cab for the military, the Navy. It starts with risk. Because we are in a risk management business. And so, the way I think about it is, if I'm walking across the street, I look both ways. Those are controls, right? Those are technologies that we have in place, right? And there's an inherent risk if I don't look one way. But what about the risk of a meteor coming down, right? So making them aware of the probability, right? And are you willing to protect every street with some beam, right? So it becomes very, very expensive, right? And so just using those types of examples. And the other thing is, when you talk about security, what about privacy, right? Privacy is, what will you do with my information? How long will you have my information, right? Things like the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, coming out here in May. So having those conversations as well. The way I explain it is, if you think about it, looking through the window, right? Say the window is your technology, or your data, rather. But how do I protect folks from seeing in? So maybe these are curtains, right? But then how do I protect the window, right? These are the burglar bars, right? So thinking about the security being the how, and then privacy being the what, essentially. But again, it goes back to the comment I made earlier. Do I have sponsorship? Secondly, what am I protecting? And so what I'm protecting is connected to PCI. What I need to do is I need to follow the breadcrumbs to all the systems that's connected with PCI, right? There's going to be some front-end web system that's processing or storing the PCI. there's probably an application and there's probably a database, right? So now these are my core sets of systems that I need to protect, right? Because they're tied back to the regulatory mandates. But what are the types of threats that are coming in, right? So having those types of conversations in terms of what's the risk, what's the information, and more importantly, what are some things that we need to do to protect the information? Those are the types of conversations that I see having at the board level.
Yeah, and I just want to add on, as I'm listening to my co-panelists' great remarks, it reminds me of a study we did last year as we were developing that capabilities indicator report that I mentioned a few moments ago. So we went out and we contacted 1,000 subject matter experts, and we asked them, the people who are doing the work day to day, the technical experts, we asked them, what's the number one thing that you need to have training on and you need to be able to do within your job across all of the roles in the NICE cybersecurity workforce framework? And they all, the number one thing they said was risk. Risk identification, prioritization, management, analysis, just understanding what the risks are, being able to prioritize them and have the conversation about which ones do we want to accept and which ones do we need to mitigate in some way. So I just think it's great to hear the other responses, and it made me think about that.
Yeah. Well, cybersecurity is kind of like taking a shower, right? You take a shower every day. No one really knows about you. But you go a few days without taking one, you become a threat. Now, that's one way to explain it.
I think there's one other comment I want to add. Those are all great points. But if we think of our security Swiss Army knife, I think these are all very similar tools, right? They're all things we can use. Liability is a conversation when you're talking to your board, because that's what they understand. They make determines decisions that mitigate or defers liability at the board level. So they may all sound the same or similar. I think the audience is the one that that justifies which choice and what language are you're gonna be talking to them. When you're talking to a board level, someone that determines risk, liability is one item. Boards, people that have vested interest in decision makers. Due diligence and due care laws are at play for people that opt not to protect the data that they're obligated to protect. So there's personal liability with due diligence associated with this as well. There's actually, we're even going through our own cybersecurity insurance assessment, and they're asking us if our own employees are being trained about their personal liability if they are assisting in a breach, whether that's an insider threat or that they're failing to do their due diligence. And those are questions that have never been brought up. What is my personal liability outside of what I do for work and outside getting fired? Someone potentially getting sued for not doing their job is a whole different discussion. So this is really a Swiss Army knife, in my opinion, that we need to leverage at the right platform and the right group. This question is a bit unique to public agencies, which I'm glad that this is really the type of group that we have here. So as a public agency, we exist to serve our constituents. How do you engage your residents, your businesses, and your elected officials?
Okay, so I really get to participate in all of the above. So I work at a fusion center. Do we have folks in the house who do not know what a fusion center is? Before I start, so fusion centers, back around the 9/11 time frame, there was a gap in communication. There was a gap in intelligence between local and federal. So big government came along and they said, okay, in order to kind of remedy this problem, we're going to stand up fusion centers. We triage information from the federal level to the local level, and then from the local level to federal level. Within the fusion centers, we have a ton of different law enforcement agencies that work together to kind of identify information that we need to share, not only with our federal partners, but with the state and with our locals. So as it pertains to kind of reaching out and engaging our residents and businesses and elected officials, our elected officials, usually we provide the information. So I manage the cyber intelligence unit at the Fusion Center, so I work very closely with law enforcement on technical issues that might need a specific kind of expertise. So whether it's reversing malware or forensics or what have you, we have someone in a team that provides that assistance out. We assist them in the investigation, and then we collect details of that compromise, and then we write towards a product, so an intelligence report, if you will. And then we provide that intelligence report out to public sector. out to law enforcement, out to our partners, state officials, and we kind of get them at an executive level, but also at a technical level too, so they can ingest those information, the IOCs or indicators of compromise, any of the information that you can utilize in a network to better secure your network. We try to provide that intelligence back out to the community. So this helps. Now, because we do deal with a lot of public sector and law enforcement at the Fusion Center, we also try to conduct outreach to the private sector as well. So you're looking at small, medium businesses or large businesses, some utilities, but we do this in a different manner. We switch hats and we utilize something called InfraGuard. InfraGuard's a non-for-profit org that the Bureau stands up, and they provide free training, if you will, for everything underneath the critical infrastructures. Ours is actually for the one that I assist co-chair is for the IT sector. So anything that's particular to IT sector, which kind of gives me a unique position because everything that I see intelligence-wise that I have to scrub, that the information is non-attributable, means that it does not go back or cannot point to an organization. I provide that information scrubbed now through InfraGuard to the private sector. So the private sector also has a chance to ingest the information and try to better their security posture, in which it assists because it builds the relationships between myself and other organizations, government entities, local entities, as well as our folks at the small, medium businesses or at the private sector level as well. So we try to kind of envelop and utilize some of the information or some of the guidance provided to us business or to us through our partners like DHS, the Bureau, Secret Service, local law enforcement, some of the best practices, some of that outreach, and we continue to assist in information sharing. Very similar to this symposium or this outreach that we've done today, is trying to bridge the communication between different sectors and different partners base or different partner sets. So when all, excuse the expression, defecation hits the oscillator, you have a face, you have a person to call, the contact, you have someone that you can go to say, hey, we're having these issues, where do I go now? It's gone beyond just the regular compromise, and we need to escalate this to law enforcement. Who do we contact? So building this communication, building this bridge of trust is definitely how we, and myself and my colleagues at the Fusion Centers participate in providing that information or building out our relationships with our constituents.
I don't have an unclass answer for that.
Okay.
I'm going to defer to the smart lady over here.
All right.
So at DHS, we have many different communication channels that we work through. As a matter of fact, I work in a division that is specific to external outreach, so there are a lot of different ways that we try to connect with our stakeholders. We have webinars, email distribution lists. We go to events across the country. We have people in regions all around the nation who are able to engage. We also work with MCSE, the Multi-State Information Sharing and Analysis Center, to share information with our state and local partners. And we run something called the Critical Infrastructure Cyber Community Voluntary Program, or the CQVP program, which has a wealth of resources. So I think the best thing I can share today is just that these tools and resources exist. There are things that are free and that can help you within your organizations, and the best way to find them is just by going to the dhs.gov website or even connecting with me after the panel. We do have distribution lists and events and lots of different things that we do to reach out to people, so if you'd like to be part of that, let me know. We can add you to some of those lists, and if you have ideas of how else we can reach out to people across the country and let them know about all of these resources available, please let us know.
Thank you. At Riverside, so we participate in the National Cybersecurity Awareness Month. We got the posters from the Stop, Think, Connect. We put some of the banners on our own signs that we have distributed across the city, so we work with our marketing department and got that done. The City Council issued a declaration for National Cybersecurity Awareness Month as well to get exposure within the community. We reached out to our Chamber of Commerce and did presentations there because we don't operate in islands. If there's significant impact to the community, that will end up flowing back to our city. FBI stats, it says more than 60+% of people, small businesses that suffer a cyber event, they go out of business within 7 months. that's catastrophic. And we're all in it together. So just like we are in the business of running and operating and providing service to the city, we're also trying to engage our own employees as well as our own community. And this is really how you drive change, because if we don't change the way we operate, we don't change human behavior, we will always end up with that 91% failure rate starting by a human being. Technology alone will fail if people look for a way to circumvent it. One of my peers made a great statement, and he said security is not a control that will prevent you from hurting yourself. What we're the guardrails on the side of the freeway that will keep you within the lanes, but if you intentionally try and ram your car against the rail, you will fall off the road. So our goal is to build the framework, build the path, and then allow the business to operate within the framework that we established and drive and engage and change the way they operate and raise awareness.
Tell it to my son. Insurance rates going up.
And with that, I want to thank the panel and thank the audience. Thank you very much. And Sherilyn has one other item to say.
DHS, thank you so much. That was great.